America isn't drifting, it's accelerating toward a reckoning we quietly scheduled for ourselves. Borders blur, prices bite, classrooms thin out, and the world reads our hesitation like a billboard. The coming months won't bring apocalypse, but collision. Math against promises, energy against slogans, law against theatrics. I'm not selling panic, I'm naming patterns every working family already tallies at the checkout and the gas pump. Republics don't fail overnight, they fray, then snap. The fix isn't mystical, it's discipline, deterrence, and honesty applied where we live. Stay with me, I'll show how we got here, and how we walk back fast together. Number 1. Borders, sovereignty, and the vanishing consent of the governed. I begin with a plain truth that elites often dress up in jargon. A nation that will not enforce its border eventually cannot enforce much else. When Congress dithers and the executive issues waivers and exceptions, the signal to the world is unmistakable. Entry becomes a matter of improvisation, not law. That is not a moral comment on the character of migrants, many of whom are brave and industrious. It is a civic indictment of leaders who outsource policy to cartels, NGOs, and chance. The result is pressure on wages at the bottom, spiraling costs for cities that never consented, and a creeping cynicism among citizens who wonder whether their votes still matter. History warns that republics erode from the frontier inward. Roman jurists knew it, the Athenians learned it, and Americans once understood it along the Rio Grande. If a government cannot define who may enter, it eventually cannot define who decides. Borders are not walls around compassion. They are guardrails for self-government. On the ground, the costs are intensely local and profoundly unequal. Mayors plead for relief while federal officials recite abstractions. School districts stretch teachers across swelling classrooms where language and trauma complicate the craft of teaching. Emergency rooms fill with patients who need care now, and the line lengthens for everyone else. Small contractors lose bids to under-the-table labor, while law-abiding employers who play by the rules absorb compliance costs their competitors sidestep. Residents who ask obvious questions are smeared as nativists by people whose zip codes buffer them from consequences. The old social compact falters when government refuses to distinguish between lawful guests and unlawful entry. Citizens do not abandon generosity, they resent being gamed. The more leaders deny the trade-offs, the more conspiracy grows in the vacuum. A republic runs on consent, and consent requires transparency, honesty, and limits. Without those, politics curdles into performance, and policy becomes a stage set. Order is not cruelty. It is mercy extended to the next lawful applicant and to the neighborhood that pays the bills. A serious nation can welcome newcomers at a pace that sustains assimilation while protecting wages, services, and trust in the rules. The program is not complicated. Finish the barrier where geography and traffic demand it. Reinstate credible interior enforcement that targets employers and repeat offenders. Expand legal channels that reward skills and English, and end policies that incentivize perilous journeys. Make federal officials answer to communities regarding placements, costs, and timelines with public dashboards that replace rumor mills. When people see fairness, they relax. When they see favoritism, they harden. The goal is not fewer immigrants. The goal is sustainable immigration that strengthens civic culture rather than dissolving it. Every healthy polity balances compassion with prudence because it owes duties to citizens and to future citizens as well. If we recover that balance, we recover consent. If we recover consent, we regain sovereignty. Then the border becomes a threshold to citizenship, not a revolving door to permanent crisis cycles. Number 2, inflation, debt, and the mirage of free money. For years, leaders treated borrowing as painless and money creation as harmless, as if interest were a relic and scarcity a superstition. Rounds of stimulus landed on an economy constrained by regulation and disrupted supply, and the bill arrived as the quiet theft of purchasing power. Groceries, rent, fuel, and insurance rose faster than wages, reminding the middle that inflation is a tax requiring no vote. When the transitory narrative collapsed, the goalposts moved, and success was redefined as slower pain rather than restored stability. Meanwhile, deficits ballooned in peacetime prosperity, and the interest on yesterday's promises began to swallow tomorrow's choices. A nation that normalizes trillion-dollar gaps invites a reckoning because compounding does not care about speeches. History offers warnings from late republics that believed clever finance could outpace arithmetic. Debasement erodes trust, and trust is the coin of a market society. Once citizens expect their money to shrink, they rush to spend, and that very rush feeds the spiral they fear, leaving policy hawks forever behind events. Inflation did not strike evenly, and it punished prudence. Savers who held cash saw years of thrift diluted, while owners of assets watched valuations lurch higher than wobble. The gap widened between those who can hedge and those who live on fixed paychecks. Governments indexed little, businesses repriced often, and families trimmed small joys before touching necessities. Higher rates then compounded the hurt. Mortgages, car notes, and credit card balances reset upward, while federal interest costs began to crowd out the basics a serious republic must fund, from defense and policing to infrastructure and courts. Markets sensed drift and demanded a premium for risk, raising borrowing costs. Universities remained insulated, but shopkeepers, renters, and young families faced arithmetic no slogan could dissolve. When leaders celebrate nominal wage gains without admitting real wage losses, people notice. They respond by disengaging, shortening their planning horizon, and doubting sacrifice today will matter tomorrow, which is fatal for investment and social trust and growth. Recovery begins with candor and sequence. Restore supply by accelerating permits, reopening energy projects, rebuilding refineries, expanding transmission, and letting entrepreneurs build what households demand. Commit to predictable taxes and rules so capital can plan for years, not months. Restrain federal growth to something that resembles revenue and triage spending toward core functions over messaging projects. Audit, emergency programs, clawback fraud, and modernize safety nets to reward work, savings, and family formation. The central bank must target stable prices, not political fashion, and explain policy in plain English. State leaders can help by insisting on transparent budgets, schools, and streamlined housing approvals to ease costs for workers. Most of all, tell the truth about trade-offs. When money is cheap, booms feel generous and risks hide. When money regains value, diligence returns and waste recedes. A serious nation chooses the latter, accepts slower sugar highs, and gains durability. If we relearn that discipline, prosperity will be earned rather than borrowed. Number 3, energy realism versus utopian timelines. I start with a plain rule of civilization that ideologues forget. Light, heat, mobility, and modern food depend on steady power that arrives every hour of every day. When leaders chase ambitious targets without the mines, rigs, pipelines, refineries, reactors, and long transmission lines to make them real, households pay through rolling outages and rising bills. I have watched growers delay planting because diesel spiked and fertilizer soared. I have seen factories shelve expansions when they cannot secure firm electricity at predictable prices. Families postpone a move because mortgages rise with rates that track energy-driven inflation. Politicians celebrate mandates while grid operators draft contingency plans. We lecture oil and gas at home while pleading with unstable regimes abroad to pump more. That contradiction broadcasts weakness and invites price shocks. The green promise becomes a luxury good for elites, while workers face the arithmetic of commuting and heating. A republic that ignores energy reality soon finds that every other policy area becomes harder, poorer, and angrier. Reality does not sneer at stewardship, it demands sequence and scale. We can lower emissions while preserving abundance when we lean on what already works at industrial size. Natural gas displaces coal now and steadies a fragile grid, while advanced nuclear returns in modular form that towns can actually permit and finance. Transmission must cross mountains and courthouses, which requires firm timelines measured in months, not decades. We should map the mineral chain like engineers rather than activists, and count the copper, nickel, graphite, rare earths, cement, and diesel needed to electrify a continent. If we refuse to mine and refine at home, we will import materials from places with fewer rights and higher leaks, and then congratulate ourselves for exported emissions. Battery storage will grow, but physics still insists on firm power through long winters and calm nights. Weather-dependent sources can help, yet they must be integrated by planners who prize reliability, not by publicists who prize applause. Serious nations choreograph transitions, unserious ones improvise shortages. So I argue for a practical course that treats energy as the spine of national strength. Finish pipelines that keep gas abundant and affordable for decades and let utilities lock in firm supply. Expand refinery capacity so fuel markets stay flexible while vehicle fleets gradually turn over. Fast-track next-generation reactors so communities can host clean baseload rather than chase intermittent trickles. Permit geothermal where heat already rises and approve drilling where geology welcomes it, while enforcing high environmental standards. Modernize ports, rail, and the grid so factories can return from strategic rivals with confidence. Reward efficiency with technology and pricing that respects freedom, not scolding. Simplify appliance and building rules so builders can deliver homes that ordinary families can heat and cool without fear. Train welders, electricians, and rig crews and pay them well because skilled labor is the real catalyst. Tell the truth about trade-offs and stop exporting guilt while importing energy. If we marry prudence to innovation, prosperity and resilience will follow. Number 4, crime, cities, and the retreat of deterrence. I learned long ago that deterrence is not cruelty. It is a public promise that wrongdoing meets swift consequences so the next victim is spared. When officials redefine crime as misunderstanding, when prosecutors downgrade felonies to misdemeanors, and when judges treat bail as an afterthought, predators act on the message. Shopkeepers bolt steel cages over toothpaste, while city halls issue statements about equity. Ordinary people read the street faster than any pollster. If the price of stealing falls, the quantity supplied rises. Subways collect fare jumpers, sidewalks collect aggressive vendors, parks collect encampments, and the line between nuisance and menace blurs. The message to the law-abiding is equally clear. Be cautious, move out, or accept the new normal. Communities that cannot rely on the state to police begin improvising private security, which is simply inequality by another name. The rule of law is humane because it is consistent. Leniency that advertises impunity is cruel because it selects the vulnerable as future victims. Order protects neighborhoods. We have lived this cycle before. New York relearned in the 1990s that tolerating small violations invites larger crimes. Rome assigned urban prefects when spectacle in the arena disguised decay on the streets. Citizens forgive leaders who admit error and restore consequences. They revolt when elites romanticize disorder they never experience. Working families ride buses past needles, wait beside menacing loiterers, and return to apartments surrounded by shuttered shops. Neighborhoods without influence absorb the experiments conceived in upscale districts that hire private patrols. Police morale sinks when officers are filmed, shamed, and abandoned for acting within policy. Young prosecutors learn to measure success by empty dockets rather than size. A fear blocks. Journalists trade euphemisms for accuracy, converting robberies into incidents and riots into unrest. Meanwhile, residents whisper what they know. Deterrence protects the poor first, the elderly next, and the wealthy last. When the vulnerable retreat indoors, civic life ebbs, schools lose volunteers, and churches lock doors. A city that cannot guarantee order cannot persuade families to stay. A serious city can reverse the drift with clarity, consistency, and care. Clarity means honest metrics, robberies counted as robberies, not washed into data fog, and public dashboards that reveal where, when, and why violence spikes. Consistency means lawful officers are backed, repeat offenders are charged, and judges weigh victims' risk over fashion. Care means the unglamorous work of drug courts, mental health beds, probation that supervises rather than winks, and shelters that protect without enabling open-air dealing. Support treatment but do not erase agency. Pair diversion with deadlines, sanctions, and restitution to victims. Rebuild recruitment pipelines, fund field training, and return proactive patrols to hot corners. Require district attorneys to publish charging standards in plain English so voters can judge outcomes. Repeal experiments that advertise impunity and invest in street lighting, cameras, cleanup, and youth leagues that crowd out idleness. The moral is old. Deterrence saves lives, especially where chaos once ruled. When citizens witness fairness and certainty, they return to sidewalks, reopen storefronts, and vote. Number 5, schools, standards, and the thinning of civic culture. I argue that a nation is what it teaches its children. For a generation, we replaced mastery with moods, grades with gestures, and history with slogans. Students advance though they cannot parse a paragraph or balance a budget, while adults congratulate themselves for sensitivity. The result is credentialed fragility. Campuses expand bureaucracies that police language, yet shrink the space for debate and discovery. Teachers drown in paperwork and fads and watch discipline collapse because rules are subjective today and revised tomorrow. Parents sense the scam when homework becomes optional and grading becomes opaque. Employers see it when interns cannot write a clear email or estimate a simple ratio. Meanwhile, the classics that once armed citizens with perspective are dismissed as oppressive, so young Americans meet the present with little context. A republic that refuses to transmit its achievements and failures does not renew itself. It produces cynics who know the vocabulary of grievance but not the grammar of liberty. The retreat from rigor did not happen by accident. Schools chased fashionable theories that prize self-esteem over study and identity over effort. They adopted grading policies that detached marks from deadlines and tests from consequences. They sidelined phonics and arithmetic drills that build fluency, then feigned surprise when scores fell. Universities recycled the same trends under grander banners and graduated cohorts fluent in activism but uneasy with evidence. The best graduates still thrive, but the median student loses ground. Families with means escape through tutors or selective admissions, while working-class parents watch options narrow. The divide hardens into a new caste system sorted by speech codes and credentials rather than competence. That is why public confidence erodes. When officials deny the obvious, citizens infer that the system serves itself. They do not hate teachers, they hate being told that failure is success. Standards safeguard dignity because they tell every child the truth about effort, potential, and reward. A recovery is possible if we restore sequence, authority, and content. Start with order in classrooms and back teachers who enforce it. Return to phonics, grammar, sentence-level writing, and daily math practice in the early grades. Teach history as tragedy and triumph with primary sources, timelines, and facts, then invite argument about meaning. Fund career and technical pathways with the same respect given to four-year degrees, and measure high schools by graduate earnings and mastery, not slogans. Post transparent curriculum online so parents can see lessons and suggest improvements. Reward excellent teachers with pay, time, and status, and open the doors to mid-career professionals who bring craft knowledge into labs and shops. End social promotion and restore culminating exams that signal readiness. Let public colleges guarantee transfer for top community college students who meet published marks. A culture that returns to merit, memory, and measurable progress can unify people who disagree on politics. That is how a republic renews itself. Renewal begins with candor, courage, repetition, and shared standards. Number 6. Lawfare, double standards, and the two-tier illusion. I speak plainly because citizens already see what commentators euphemize. when prosecutors turn grudges into indictments, when bureaucracies bend rules for fashionable causes, and when the press decides which scandals count, the loser is not a party, but the republic. Equal law is a muscle. Stop exercising it, and it atrophies. We once agreed that the state's power to seize, surveil, must be constrained by the same standards no matter who holds office. That truce is fraying. Selective enforcement creates a ratchet where one side invents new theories to hobble opponents and the other answers in kind. The public learns the wrong lesson. Outcomes depend less on facts than on zip codes, juries, venues, and affiliations. Athens flirted with ostracism and learned that punishing rivals corrodes consent. Late Republican Rome perfected tactic, and politics devolved into prosecutions followed by prescriptions. A constitutional order cannot survive as a contact sport where the referee wears team colors, citizens withdraw, entrepreneurs hedge, and institutions become stages for vendettas rather than arenas for law. Double standards do damage beyond the courtroom. On campuses and in corporations, speech codes operate like private blasphemy laws that muzzle the unfashionable while granting indulgences to preferred groups. Bureaucratic discretion, once narrow and reviewable, expands into a fog where outcomes hinge on ideology rather than evidence. Social media platforms outsource censorship to nonprofits and contractors, then call it moderation, while agencies launder pressure through intermediaries. Ordinary people adapt by self-censoring, retreating from civic life, or speaking in codes that drain clarity. Businesses learn to rent-seek. They hire fixers rather than improve products. Journalists trade inquiry for activists. And wonder why audiences flee. Foreign rivals watch and infer that our rules are negotiable, elites unaccountable, and attention spans short. The net effect is demoralization. When a vandal faces no bail while a whistleblower faces ruin, citizens do not parse briefs. They conclude that principle has been replaced by preference, and they act accordingly. That is the seedbed of cynicism and solvent of loyalty. A republic cannot live on exemptions. The remedy is not new partisans with better slogans, but a restoration of predictability. Publish charging standards and apply them regardless of status. End secrecy deals that hide records. Sunlight cures rumors. Demand warrants for surveillance with timelines and punish officials who leak or mislead courts. Reform venue rules so cases cannot be hand-picked for juries. Require agencies to post guidance before they punish, and let citizens contest it in open public forums. Impose term limits on special counsels, require reports to Congress, and close investigations exceeding mandates. Strengthen whistleblower protections shielding dissent without licensing sabotage. Rebuild a civil service that prizes neutrality, punishes partisanship, and rewards competence. Finally, preach restraint. A healthy polity defeats opponents at the ballot box, not by weaponizing process crimes and paperwork traps. If we restore one standard evenly applied, we restore legitimacy. With legitimacy comes acceptance of outcomes and the return of civic peace. Number 7, deterrence abroad, disorder at home, the strategic feedback loop. I make a simple connection that strategists sometimes dodge. Weakness at home invites tests abroad, and each foreign test boomerangs back to households in the form of prices, shortages, and anxiety. When budgets swell with entitlements and interest, procurement shrinks, maintenance slips, and the arsenal of democracy turns into a museum of intentions. Rivals sense the gap between speeches and factories. They probe shipping lanes, cyber grids, and treaty lines to see whether rhetoric masks exhaustion. Energy incoherence multiplies the risk because tankers, pipelines, and refineries do not care about hashtags. If we scold producers at home while begging autocracies for supply, we telegraph dependence and tempt blackmail. Allies then hedge, adversaries coordinate, and insurance premiums silently tax every container and airline ticket. Citizens feel the chain reaction as groceries rise, flights cancel, and headlines normalize brinkmanship. The pattern is old. The 1930s were not loud at first. They were incremental, tentative, and rationalized. Deterrence decayed one postponement at a time until events set the timetable. Deterrence is not chest thumping. It is the quiet certainty that aggression will fail at manageable cost. That certainty rests on three pillars: capacity, clarity, and will. Capacity is industrial, shipyards with workers, powder plants with stockpiles, semiconductor fabs that deliver, and energy systems that keep prices stable when crises strike. Clarity is diplomatic, red lines few and real, promises specific, and missions sized to the forces we actually field. Will is cultural, a citizenry that expects leaders to prepare in peacetime rather than improvise under fire. At present we speak loudly while we ration munitions, disperse production across rivals, and outsource mining to Regi. Maize that disdain our values, we audition coalitions while neglecting logistics. We wage communications campaigns while skimping on air defense, sea lift, and submarine crews. The home front senses the mismatch and responds with cynicism. Markets then price the risk through higher insurance, higher rates, and capital flight, which erodes readiness further. The loop tightens until a spark turns drift into emergency. Repairing the loop begins with domestic seriousness. Lock multi-year procurement so industry hires, toolers invest, and arsenals produce at scale, then measure success in delivered hulls, missiles, and trained crews rather than press releases. Streamline permitting for refineries, reactors, ports, and transmission so energy shocks cannot veto strategy. Reshore critical chips, energetics, and rare earth processing with competitive taxes, rapid siting, and strict security audits. Tie aid to allies to concrete timelines, sustainment plans, and stockpile targets, and reward those who share burdens with preferred access and joint production. Clarify commitments in the Indo-Pacific and Europe, cut slogans, and rehearse the logistics that wars actually demand. Fuel bladders, rail cars, dry docks, medevac, and replacement parts. At home, restore civic peace through policing that is fair and firm, schools that teach mastery, and budgets that match revenue. A nation that can enforce its border, balance its books, and power its industry projects steadiness without melodrama. That steadiness is the surest deterrent, the cheapest insurance, and the fastest path back to normal life for families. Number 8. The populist realignment, working versus ruling classes. I have watched a realignment few pundits predicted. Working people of every background drifting toward parties that speak to wages, crime, borders, and energy, while managerial classes, tenured, subsidized, and insulated, migrate to a politics of symbolism. It is not primarily about charisma or tweets. It is about who pays for mistakes. When fuel spikes, commutes lengthen, shelves thin, and schools stall, hourly workers cannot pass the bill to endowments, foundations, or remote work. They wake before dawn, time their budgets to the penny, and meet reality at the pump and the checkout. By contrast, those with sinecures experience policy as posture, fashionable mandates, travel stipends, curated neighborhoods, and a private security version of compassion. So the vocabulary of politics flips. The once dominant party of labor often defends bureaucracies that frustrate building, drilling, policing, and teaching. The insurgent coalition, increasingly multi-ethnic and blue-collar, talks about consequences and competence. I do not romanticize populists. I simply note who feels the friction and who narrates it from a studio. Old coalitions crumble because rhetoric no longer matches realities on the block and shop floor. I grew up among families who asked little from government beyond order, predictable rules, and roads that worked. They do not begrudge success. They resent being patronized while their neighborhoods absorb experiments drafted in conference rooms. They notice how agencies tangle small businesses in fines while waiving rules for preferred clients. They see district attorneys boast about equity, while repeat offenders terrorize buses and bodegas. They watch universities police pronouns while graduating students who cannot write. So they cross over. They still dislike crude talk and carnival rallies, yet I decide that noise is cheaper than policies that empty savings. Commentators misread this as hysteria. I hear something colder, a transactional demand for competence. Deliver safer streets, cheaper energy, merit in schools, and a border that functions, and you earn another look. Sneer at those priorities, and the working class vote hardens in opposition. They also notice media apologies that excuse failure. A durable realignment must channel frustration into construction. That means borders that signal fairness, legal pathways that reward skills in English, and interior enforcement that punishes employers who game the system. It means accelerating permits for pipelines, refineries, transmission, and modular reactors so households can plan and factories return. It means schools that teach reading, math, and history with rigor, and apprenticeships that restore pride to craft. It means budgets that match revenue, welfare that rewards work and marriage, and public safety measured in victims spared rather than cases dismissed, measured publicly and audited quarterly by independent citizens' boards. Talk less about managing narratives and more about pouring concrete, laying cable, and graduating welders. Recruit competent administrators who publish clear rules, post dashboards, and meet deadlines. Respect speech even when it stings because a confident culture prefers argument to censorship. If leaders marry prudence to energy, merit to mercy, borders to assimilation, and deterrence to diplomacy, the realignment will mature into a governing majority rather than a fling of protest. America's crisis is not fate. It is the sum of policies sold as painless and extended past their shelf life. Borders shrugged at law, budgets mocked arithmetic, energy debates prized theater over watts, classrooms traded mastery for mood, and prosecutors recast leniency as compassion. The invoice arrived as prices that sprint, streets that fray, and institutions that wobble. I argue for something older than fashion, standards binding rulers and ruled, merit rewarding effort, deterrence shielding the vulnerable, and speech sharpening choices. A republic survives by telling the truth, enforcing one rule for all, and producing goods. Return to those habits, and confidence rises without slogans while prosperity rests on work. So start where you stand, demand clear rules and even application, back lawful officers and judges who remember victims, insist that schools teach phonics, math, writing, and candid history, permit pipelines, reactors, and transmissions so wages rise with reliable power, reward apprenticeships and small manufacturers that anchor neighborhoods. Expect budgets that match revenue and leaders who show their math in plain English. Read books with your children, rebuild civic clubs, and practice thrift that turns slogans into savings. Support families, marriage, and work because social capital is the best insurance. If this message resonates, help push it past the noise. Share the video, post your story in the comments, and challenge any point that needs sharpening. Subscribe for the series as we turn principles into concrete steps. Support the channel if you can, and carry these ideas into daily decisions.